Welcome to this panel session on embracing the digital revolution. My name is Kay Swinburne and I'm the Vice Chair of Financial Services at KPMG, and I have the pleasure of guiding us through the session today. The panel will look at ways in which the financial and related professional services industry can digitise and innovate in order to deliver better outcomes and value for its customers, such as through accelerating the sustainable recovery. And over the last 10 months, I've worked closely with Ron Kalifa on the UK FinTech Strategy review, where I was asked to write the policy and regulation chapter. The Kalifa review overall had numerous valuable recommendations, but the policy and regulation chapter focused on how the UK can deliver a digital finance system of the future, with concrete proposals on things like digitised assets, digital ID, smart data, and the role of AI, to name but a few. And transforming the UK's financial services and markets regulatory framework to accelerate that digitised future will likely amplify the UK fintech ecosystem, which already contributes 11 billion to the UK economy and continues to be fast growing. Now, my panelists today are experts in their field and will include a contribution from Ron Kalifa, setting the scene. Now, Lou Smith, who is the first Chief Digital Officer at Lloyds and is the incoming Chair of Innovate Finance, Louise is recognised as a thought leader on digital innovation, on disruptive technologies and the emerging workforce, and has had an extensive career in creating and running digital business models. Lou is also a regional fintech ambassador appointed by the UK government, where she supports new incumbents in the financial services sector and collaborates with the startup community and challengers. So welcome, Lou. Bridget Rosewell became chairman of Atom Bank in January 2018. She has an economics background and is also the chair of M6 Toll Company and a board member of Northumbrian Water. Bridget has sat on the Ulster Bank and the Britannia Building Society boards, and as well as advising government, works on development projects in infrastructure and on risk analysis. And finally, my final panelist, Charlotte Wood. Charlotte is the head of innovation at Schroders, where she's globally responsible for the company's engagement with startups, as well as the company's internal innovation activities. And as the first head of innovation at Schroders, she has been instrumental in developing the company's strategic approach to innovation and setting the agenda for fintech collaborations, including the launch of Schroders' startup program, Cobalt. Now, prior to joining Schroders, she worked in financial services consulting and spent a year in Silicon Valley, partnering with VCs and startups. And because of this really great background, she was recently selected as a rising star of asset management by Financial News and featured in the recently announced Standout 35 Innovate Finance's Women in FinTech Awards. So I'm really pleased that we've got this stellar panel together. Unfortunately, Ron Kalifa, who chaired the government's recent FinTech review, is unable to join us in person today. However, he has, in true digital style, sent us a video message to share some insights on his review's recommendations and on the importance of growing the UK's already burgeoning FinTech sector. Let's take a look at what Ron has to say.
I'm Ron Kalifa. I recently chaired the Treasury Commission review into UK FinTech. Let me start by thanking the City UK for organising this really excellent event and for inviting me to speak today about the FinTech review and, importantly, its findings as well. The premise behind the review is that the divide between FinTech and the traditional financial sector is diminishing. The rise of FinTech has forced our mainstream financial institutions to adapt and to innovate, and creating a much more successful FinTech ecosystem is therefore no longer just about starting and supporting startups. It's much more than that. And if we want the UK to remain a globally competitive financial centre, our traditional players, just as much as our new ones, have got to embrace and lead this technological revolution. I quite often say that FinTech is the future of financial services, and my ambition for the review was to set out a strategy and a delivery model for the UK to provide this leadership. We built the strategy around 5 core lenses. They were policy and regulation, skills, investment, international competitiveness, and national connectivity, or levelling up. I think the good news for us is that we're not starting from a position of weakness. We actually have a leadership position in fintech that is envied around the world. It's interesting that in the UK, the UK has a global market share of 10%. That represents about £11 billion in revenue. And the purpose of the review was to help the UK build on this and achieve much more. And with good reason, a further increased market share of only 2% would result in £46 billion worth of revenue by 2030. So I was absolutely delighted that the Chancellor has confirmed that the government will action on a number of the recommendations that we've put forward. This includes implementing a fintech scale box, introducing a new fast-track visa system for scale-ups, and also a commitment to consulting on the listing rules so that we can attract more IPOs here in London. The Chancellor has also backed our proposal to create a Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. CFIT, as I call it, is essentially the theme and the activity that represents the broader vision for fintech. It'll combine the UK's strengths in fintech, in tech, and in finance to address the key challenges that I think our ecosystem is facing. Things such as digital ID, open data, data standards. These are ambitious and long-term proposals that will ensure that the UK can capture the extraordinary potential of technology and cement our position as the world's preeminent financial centre. The Chancellor called the review, a seminal piece of work, and I'm really looking forward to working with him, his department, and others across government, and frankly industry as well, on finding a way to implement these recommendations. Let me finish by wishing the panel a really successful discussion on what I know is a very, very important topic. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Ron, for that commentary. Really, really helpful. I think we'll now turn to our panel here. So I'm going to start by congratulating Lou. Lou, congratulations on your chairmanship of Innovate Finance at this really crucial time for the industry. We've just heard from Ron Kalifa on his reflections on how to grow our UK fintech sector. So I'm going to start by asking, what do you believe needs to be done from a policy perspective or otherwise in order for the UK to facilitate the growth of a world-leading fintech sector?
So firstly, Kay, thank you so much for that congratulations. I must admit it's a little bit of a pinch me moment. I'm incredibly excited and privileged to be working with the Innovate Finance team and obviously Janine and the guys who do an incredible job, and what a legacy they've already left. And I'm looking forward to where we go in the future. So thank you for that. And this is my first panel, actually. I don't actually start until about mid-July. And thanks for inviting me. I think in terms of the Kalifa review, and just let me talk about some things we're particularly excited about, but also importantly where we also think we need to go. We're particularly excited about the commitment to how we make the UK more attractive location for IPOs. So that's certainly one that we're particularly excited about. And then obviously the regulatory scale box. I think it's already well known globally that regulatory regime and what the FCA does is actually accelerated and powered a number of fintechs and also innovation within the incumbents. So we're particularly excited about how the scale box will accelerate growth and also the announcement of CFIT, and we're keen to work with CFIT as we move forward, as we have done up until now. And we're also pretty excited around a number of other areas, particularly around the Bank of England and the HMT task force, and also some of the DIT Academy initiatives to establish the FinTech Champion. So there's some real specifics in there that actually get to the heart of how we can continue to not just stay relevant, but also continue to be globally recognised as the place to come for fintechs and actually financial services in its broadest sense. I think some of the areas that we really do need to ensure that we continue within that, so not just start, but continue to drive as we have done, is that partnership with the regulators. That's why that scale box is so important, but also that joined up communication, that joined up commitment with the regulators. Take advantage of the post-Brexit scenario. I know Janine would want me to say that, because we also think that's an opportunity with that enhanced regulatory regime to attract fintechs, and also then ensure that we look at how do we incentivise the incumbents to partner with fintechs. And having come from an incumbent, in fact, two in my career over the period of time, but also more recently, NatWest RBS before I joined Lloyd's of London. This is really key, because I actually think there's a lot that goes on partnering more than we talk about. And we're still using use cases now that are actually a fair bit old. And I think more of this happens, but we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it more. We need to look at how we can continue to learn, but also how we can continue to incentivise the incumbents to partner. And then the last one for me is around how do we look more broadly than just the fintechs. I think many people talk about, as we come through the pandemic, obviously in the last financial crisis, we saw the rise of the challenges, particularly in retail banking. And I think one of the things that we all felt when we saw that was this real focus on the customer. You didn't just hear it, you felt it. I think as we come through the pandemic, we're going to see a fair bit of disruption around insurance and asset management. So how can we look at engaging that community as we move forward to create great customer propositions, but also accelerate strategy within the incumbents? So those are kind of where we are, but we're really excited by the Kalifa review. As I say, it really targets some of the things that Innovate Finance have been talking about. And then obviously the Chancellor's commitment during FinTech Week off the back of that. So long answer, Kay, but I think it was important to cover some of that scope. Charlotte, you may have other things to add to that, but that's certainly where we are.
That's extremely interesting, Lou, and it just demonstrates the breadth and depth of that Kalifa review in terms of how much there is to do and how much industry and the system, the regulators and indeed the policymakers have also got to do. Charlotte, with regards to the asset management industry, I mean, maybe you can help us understand which areas of fintech are we seeing the most innovation in currently, and what's on your radar from that asset management perspective?
Yeah, so I guess I'd start by saying I think Lou's absolutely right when she talks about the different areas of financial services and where we've seen the most disruption and innovation to date, which has probably been more in the kind of retail banking area. But it's definitely in the last couple of years, possibly even longer, moved into kind of other verticals, including investment management. We're seeing loads of really great innovation in terms of kind of customer propositions, and also now in terms of kind of B2B fintechs and the services that they can provide to asset managers. So there's a lot going on. I think my team and our focus areas are very much aligned to our kind of overall company strategy, which looks a lot at kind of personalization, getting close to the end investor, thinking about private assets. So I think to tie all of those themes together, I'd probably say a big area of focus for us is kind of the democratization of investments. And that's both in terms of people having access to investments that they might not have done previously. So thinking about private assets and some of the fintech innovation that's bringing down minimum investments into private asset investments, but also to things like personalization, where previously you had to be a really big institution or a very, very wealthy investor in order to see any kind of personalization in the offering that you could get. But now a lot of fintechs are actually enabling people to personalize things based on maybe their values, maybe they want thematic investments, and all of that kind of being tied into the proposition that they can receive for a much lower initial investment and initial kind of investable assets. So I think that will be really great for the consumer. And it will be really good for asset managers to be able to respond to that, to kind of give a much broader offering to our clients.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I look forward to that more personalised experience as a consumer. And I'm sure many of us do on this call. But I'd just like to remind the audience that you can ask questions directly of the panel. So if you want to actually put the questions in the Q&A box, we will put them through to the panelists as we go on here. But we're going to have a fairly informal session here between us, discussing the innovation agenda and how we actually take fintech in the broader sense of financial technology forwards as an industry and as a country indeed. So I guess for me, it would be very helpful, Charlotte. I know you spend a lot of time looking at the ESG agenda within Schroders, but the G7 meeting of finance ministers and then the G7 Council took a lot of time over the last couple of weeks discussing the ESG agenda, particularly climate. But are there ways in which fintech can support the green finance agenda and the data challenge of those new corporate disclosures?
Yes, I think fintech can play a huge role in this. And as you say, a large part of that will be in the data challenges. A lot of the information that we need on companies in order to understand whether what their impact is on the climate and also in other areas of ESG is new information that isn't provided at the moment globally in a kind of consistent manner, and all of the kind of background information that we need. So fintechs are great at data challenges, both in terms of kind of access to alternative data, but then also what you do with that once you've got hold of it. So we're looking a lot at how fintech can support us in that area. We've also kind of invested a lot in our own tools to help with our investment decisions, as a lot of investment managers have. So there's a lot of work going on in that space. I think another area where fintech can really help is in actually articulating the impact of their investments to the end investor, and to kind of link what they are actually investing in to an outcome. And what fintechs, again, are really strong at is that consumer experience and helping to explain quite complicated concepts in a way that actually makes sense to an individual. So I think that's another area where we're seeing a lot of innovation in terms of that customer experience of kind of what is their money actually doing. I think fintech has a huge, huge part to play in this.
Thank you, Charlotte. And coming to Bridget. Bridget, at Atom Bank, you're doing things differently, and it would be really helpful if you could share with the audience in what ways consumers are benefiting as that UK fintech sector grows, and where should future development be targeted?
I suppose that there's two pieces around how I might respond to that. One is, and it follows on a little bit from Charlotte, I suppose, is how you provide the right kind of information to people at the point that they need it, but also how you're doing that efficiently and effectively so that they get the best return on their savings, the best rates on their mortgages, and that they've got a clear picture of how all of those things are balancing out. Kind of interesting, actually, I suppose, in that respect, you go back to the introduction of offset mortgages, for example. That came about as technology improved and people were able to see how technology helped them and had that visibility of what was happening to their money in a very different way. And that is one of the things that Atom Bank is about. The other thing that I think is really important is how consumers understand and are able to understand not just how their money is being used, but also what things cost what, if you like. So we've had a whole period in which free people think banking can be free. although in fact all of us know that it's not. But all that means is that people are using services that they're not paying for, and other banking customers are having to pay for those. And I think as we go through into open banking, and we're very keen on to leverage that, as we go through into open banking, as we see how transactions are actually managed, we will be much clearer, and customers will be clearer and get a better visibility of what it is that they're paying for as we develop these services. And I think that's actually particularly important. It's really important that people know what it is they are paying for, and that it's not all wrapped up into some interest rate that they're not getting on their savings, for example.
Thank you. And Bridget, I just wonder, the question I asked Charlotte just before then was about supporting the green finance agenda. Is that something that's on your radar as a new entity?
Well, very much so. And I suppose there's a whole lot of aspects to that. It's also how you run your own operations and making sure you're doing that in as green a way as possible. We've invested in a building which is very green as our headquarters, for example. So you try and put your money where your mouth is, as it were. But also beginning to think about what, as we help, our mission, if you like, is to help people who want to grow their own businesses, people who want to grow their own homes. How does that play into what sort of mortgages that you're prepared to offer? How do you help finance heat pumps, for example, or reinvestment in the heat agenda for your properties, which is something everybody is going to have to think about? How do we make sure we're signaling to people how costs are likely to change in terms of how they run their buildings? I think it's very much that which is really important.
And Lou, you're wearing two hats. You have your day job with Lloyds, where I'm sure climate risk is something that you have to consider fairly extensively, but also in your Innovate Finance role. I know you're just coming into it, but this is an area that Innovate Finance have been leading on. So it'd be really great to have your views on where FinTech can help you.
Yeah, so in terms of a couple of things on that, I thought Charlotte was bang on, actually, how she summarised the answer to this question. So firstly, Innovate Finance are hosting, so I need to plug this, hosting a summit, a mini summit actually at the end of October, where we will explore FinTech, but also, as you said, Kay, broader financial innovations role in the road to net zero. I think we have a massive opportunity here, and it is data. I think you're bang on right, Charlotte, in terms of how do we drive forward in this space. And I know many are sort of committing to that. So we want to play our part in looking at how can FinTech and innovation support and drive to that road of net zero. And then in my day job, I think that we're uniquely placed, actually. So when I look at what's happened even recently through the pandemic, when I look at climate, but also when I look at cyber, so some of the biggest things that challenge us and we face as we move forward, I think there is a massive opportunity for us to take a real drive in that area. And that's why we're focused in those things. But I think Charlotte's bang on right. I think this is data driven, but I think we need to look at how do we harness the broader FinTech community to play a role.
Thank you.
If I could just come back on that point, because I think the other part of this is how the FinTech can help use the data to give longer term strategic views. One of the challenges in net zero investment, putting my infrastructure hat on, one of those challenges is the length of time for returns. And that's one of the things that we've been bad at. And then government has come in to do that part of it. But I think better data and better ways of creating those models might well help in developing products which have a longer life.
That makes perfect sense. And Bridget, just to stick to this, I mean, the pandemic seems to have accelerated that consumer digital journey. and what needs to be done now to capitalise on this newfound confidence in the way we're doing things. Certainly when my mother decides to use online banking, nearly turning 80, you know that things have changed. So how do we capitalise on it?
My mother is also using some online banking. She's 97, so you're absolutely right. So I suppose, how do we capitalise on it? I think is actually by really listening to our customers and being willing to. I've always said at Atom, in fact, I sent a birthday card a couple of years ago to our oldest customer when she got to 100. So it's always been about the willingness to do digital rather than a particular demographic. And I think we got awfully stuck early on demographic and how this was all about a particular group of people, and it's not. So I think it's actually pretty simple. And it's not really even about capitalizing. It's about continuing to do what customers want and listening to customers and developing the things and delivering the things reliably on a regular basis that customers want, accepting that there are occasions when the tech does go wrong. And I was late joining because for some reason I had the Wi-Fi all collapsed, accepting that things will go wrong and be willing to apologize when they do.
And Charlotte, has the pandemic had an impact in accelerating the consumer digital journey for your clients and customers?
Yes, certainly in the way that we look to engage with our clients and customers. I mean, asset management is obviously quite a high touch industry. And we've traditionally held a lot of in-person conferences and meetings, and that's how we work. It's very, very face-to-face. And the pandemic has obviously changed all of that, forcing kind of digital-only events and digital channels of communication. And I don't think it will fully go back to how it was before. I think, to follow on from what Bridget said, it's about choice, really, of how our customers want to engage with us and the tasks that they want to do online, or if they do want face-to-face, then they can have that too. And I think understanding what people want to use digital channels for and catering to that is really, really important. And there are pros of that, which, they may have 24/7 access. They can always go and look at their investments, and that's a big plus, rather than having to wait until someone's available to talk to them. But then, not being able to have the level of kind of in-depth conversation and interaction you can, that is only, that you only get from a person. So I think it's really about understanding kind of what people want to achieve and giving them the choice of how to do that. But it's certainly something that we were very thankful that we'd made a number of investments into technology in advance of the pandemic, and we'll continue to do that. We've got, I think, a long way to go.
Do you have any comments?
Yeah, so can I just, because I think this one's an important one. So firstly, this generational myth, and it is a myth, is a really big myth. And I think, we need to be careful that we don't bucket people into whether they are adopters or not based on age or even demographics. So I think both what Charlotte and Bridget, and actually yourself, Kay, have said is really important. We don't create some myths there because they're simply unfounded. I think for me, and I think what's really important is we have seen a growth in digital adoption, some of that because we've had no other choice. But actually, let's talk about trust. So Nesta did a report around August last year, so probably about midway through the pandemic or through the first lockdown, or as we were going into the second. I can't quite work out my waves at the moment. But I think in terms of what we have seen is an adoption rate increase. So it was about 70% before the pandemic. It's now a sort of mid to high 70s. So we're seeing growth there. But more importantly, we're seeing trust. So 54% of consumers are now using those tools for money management. Before they did, and 23% are more likely to trust it now that than they did before lockdown. So I think it's not just adoption, but it's also trust. And I think there's now an opportunity for us to continue that growth. Don't forget that will also have been fueled by the non-bank lenders. So some of the fintechs in that space, people like Funding Circle who are supporting the business loans. So I think it's really important now what we do is we build on the trust of those technologies, but also how it will continue to foster competition of new products and services, and also and hopefully we can start to create that partnering that I talked about at the start of the panel around the incumbents with those fintechs. So I think we've seen movement, and I think that trust one is probably the more important one from where I'm looking at the data as well as the adoption, but how do we now capitalise on that to continue that growth and that trust as we move forward? As Bridget said, there's going to be issues. There will always be issues with tech, but there'll also be issues with face-to-face or emotionally connected conversations. They don't always go right, but our reaction to them is usually far more magnified when it's an automated one versus a person. But it's how do we actually... I think it's more in the response when those things go wrong. So things do go wrong, but how well do we respond and quickly? So I think there's a real opportunity now, foster trust, but also look at how we can drive some healthier competition across the market and encourage more of that partnering and collaboration. That would be my view, which I think builds on Charlotte's and Bridget's answer.
And also, that it's a really, really good point about competition. But it also leads us into what I think is going to be very important, which is banking has been so stuck on product, and they think about product and the product profitability and so on and so forth, instead of thinking about a customer journey. And that's a very, very different way of thinking, and builds absolutely into your points about trust. It's not about product, it's about a customer.
Yeah. If I might also just add one quick point on that, this is where I'm really thankful to have a global role, because it means we can take lessons from other markets and see the trends of what's happening in other regions. So when you look at the digitization trend and the trend to mobile, there are other parts of the world that are further along that journey than the UK, and it's great to be able to learn from those markets and from our customers in those markets and try and understand what it is that they're asking for and what our peers are doing and what new fintechs are doing, and try to take some of that and bring it into the UK as well. So I think a global perspective on this is also really important, because people, countries are moving at different speeds.
And Lou, maybe you'd like to take that one up that Charlotte has just said about other jurisdictions around the world that the UK might be able to learn from in this area. And what sort of lessons would you like us to implement here in order to support the UK fintech sector?
Sure. So let me first start off. The UK is doing a great job in this space already, which you'd expect me to say. So, and we are. And I talked about some of those great things, particularly in the regulatory and some of the work the FCA are doing. I think there's some incredible stuff already that we're doing in the UK. However, there are things we can learn. If I take Singapore, for example, they've actually done some incredible stuff around funding, but not funding with one angle. So I think, and this is where I think we can learn in the R&D department, which I think we need to. So in Singapore, what they have is if I call it 3 levels of funding or 3 types of funding, which are supporting and attracting fintechs and then supporting their growth. And that first level of funding is around grant training, which gives or encourages fintechs to train and deepen the capabilities of their employees, which I think adds one dimension to it. The next one then is around support packages, which helps firms adopt digital solutions. So that encourages that strong collaboration. And I think that's what's really important, as I talked about some of the areas we need to have an eye on as we move forward, using the Kalifa review as a baseline. And then the last one, and I think this one is pretty neat, and I've seen a few jurisdictions try this, but I think where Singapore are focused on is access to digital platforms. And what they're doing is they're providing access to an API exchange for fintechs for free for about 6 months, and where they can do digital self-assessment frameworks. So they're actually allowing the kind of like the access to things to come to you. So what I'm seeing in Singapore is funding, and everybody talks about grants and funding, but we're also seeing it in a targeted way to support that growth in other areas. And I thought that model was pretty neat. But I'll finish where I started. The UK is also doing a fantastic job, and we need to talk about that. But as I say, I think there's areas where we can learn in the R&D department. And again, Bridget and Charlotte might have a view on that as well.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the UK is doing a great job, and we've participated in programs in the UK, but also in other jurisdictions, including Singapore, where there are organisations trying to support corporates in partnering with fintechs, and I think that is very important and helpful. I think from an industry perspective, in terms of kind of asset managers who are looking to partner with fintechs, something that we've found really valuable is actually kind of working with the equivalent of kind of DIT, both kind of within the UK, and then also looking at countries like Singapore, where they can introduce us to people who are solving industry problems in one location and think about whether we can actually apply them in other locations as well. So I think a lot of the industry problems in some of these jurisdictions are very similar, and it would be great to get more cross-pollination between the countries, because we've certainly found some very relevant solutions in other geographies, and we've kind of looked to bring that into our thinking in the UK as well.
So I think I might add to that. Actually, the piece about training, your level 1 from Singapore, Lou, I think that's really interesting. One of the things that we do a lot of in the Northeast, Atom Bank is based up in the Northeast, and we started up there as a response to the Northeast economy punching below its weight. And one of the things that we do a lot of is supporting STEM education in various sorts of ways, in schools, supporting internships, universities, whatever we can get involved with, really, to try and support both STEM in general, but also fin and tech, if you like, together, and bringing those together and supporting all of that as the importance of that kind of stream of activity in the region. But also, I think that's really important across the country as a whole, and we need to do more of it.
And my next question is going to come. It's an audience question. So they'd like us to talk about the way the UK is improving cybercrime defence and the work across the industry and government. And I suspect all three of you have got a view on this. So maybe we start with you, Bridget, and work our way around.
Okay, thank you. Absolutely. It was occurring to me as well that we should probably talk about cyber and the potential for cybercrime, which is obviously increasing all the time. And it's not a question of having complete walls, because the attacks on those walls are always present. And so thinking about how you do disaster recovery, how you get firewalls or fire breaks, if you like, between different parts of your system so that one thing cannot affect another, continually training your people to be resistant to and observant of phishing attacks. And I would suspect that there is no single one of us who's never clicked when they should not have clicked. So the question is how you actually protect all of your systems against that. So you're always looking for partners to help you. And again, this is something where industry as a whole really needs to work together to be as responsive as possible and to continue to shore up the defences, because they will always be under attack.
Lou?
Go on, Charlotte, if you want to go.
Sure. I guess I've got a couple of comments on this. I'll preempt Lou in saying this by saying I think in the UK we have a really fantastic cyber talent, which is great. There are loads of startups operating in this space. Something I found very interesting when I joined Schroders in this new role was that of all the teams I spoke to about engaging with startups, I'd say our cyber cyber team was actually probably one of the more advanced in that area. And a lot of that was because of the fact that, you know, the innovations that are coming out of the kind of startup scene, you kind of almost need to be engaging at that early stage in order to stay ahead of the curve and to stay protected. So I think it's an area where working with startups can really bring a huge amount of benefit in terms of shaping the solutions that corporates need and potentially don't even know they need yet, but will do in the future. So that's been really great. And there are quite a few very good cyber tech accelerators in the UK as well, which we found really helpful to work with, Cylon Labs being one of them. But I think there's a huge amount of talent and there's a lot of scope for the UK to actually be a real leader in this space, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll try and build rather than repeat. And I think Bridget talked about this much earlier on around why it's important to think about things from a customer journey perspective and from an end-to-end customer perspective, because this is one that can destroy confidence and trust within your customer base very, very quickly. And there's no complete 100% solution to it in terms of defence. So it's about creating defence in multiple ways. So just a couple of things. It's about not just the technology, but also and how quickly can you spot something, respond to something and fix it. But it's also about creating a culture of awareness within the organisation. It's about making sure that you've got those multiple lines of defence through technical, culture and the power of people. And I think that's really important. And then you almost have to assume, and I think it was where Bridget was almost going was around, or she might have actually said it, so forgive me, Bridget, if you did, you almost have to assume that your data is going to get hacked or customers are going to get impacted in some way, so that you can start, so that you never think about this in once and done, that you continuously look at where are those areas of risk or gap that you have to focus on and continuously testing them. So it's about making sure that you're always prepared and you know what the playbook is, whether that's cyber or ransomware. And I think it's becoming more important that you focus on those people, technology, but you have an approach or playbook, whatever the best way to call that is, so that we understand exactly what's happening as we move forward. I think Charlotte's bang on right. We've got some fantastic organisations here who are looking at this in multiple ways. But I think you've got to think about it as an organisation that this is going to happen. So how can you limit the impact of it quickly and respond to customers quickly and restore faith when those impacts happen? And it's one, I think, that's going to grow in terms of topic and conversation as we move forward on a number of panels, actually.
Cutting off the ransomware is going to be a big issue, actually, as we saw with the recent events with Colonial.
Yes.
And we may well need some support in government as a whole to help us, help. What does happen? Do you give way to ransomware? And who knows how many people have already paid off ransoms? And of course, the more you do it, the more it happens. So I think it's going to be an increasing problem.
So just very quick round, 10 seconds each. I've got an audience question here saying the single most important ingredient for the UK's future success. What would it be? Bridget.
Open to innovation, continuing innovation and supporting innovation in all its places, not just in FinTech, but everywhere.
Charlotte.
I'd say a consumer focus. Who are these products being built for, and what's the benefit for them, and how do we move that forward?
Lou.
Two things. I think the scale-up box with the FCA is going to be really important, because I think that will take us even further forward than we have with the work we've been doing with the regulators till now. But one that I talk about all the time is collaboration. We have to partner, and the more we actually get collective strength, the greater we will become. And it's that collective strength that we have to focus on and move forward with.
What a great point to actually end on. And I think it's very clear that we are at an inflection point for financial technology in the broader sense. The UK government and regulators, I guess, have got a part to play in policy decisions and establishing frameworks. But industry, both large and small, also have a part to play in delivering that innovation and pushing the boundaries to ensure that that UK financial services ecosystem embraces the digital agenda rapidly and I guess stays ahead of the global competition. It's a worthwhile prize, and I think industry is capable, both incumbents and the disruptors, to work with those regulators and policymakers to ensure that, that we stay as the leading fintech centre and that it becomes ubiquitous, and that London eventually becomes that leading digital financial centre, so that we turn everything digital, but we're still that leading financial centre. My thanks to Lou, Bridget and Charlotte, and of course Ron for his contribution. And I would say this is my second panel this week where we've had an all-female panel. So I'm really glad that we're managing to do this. But Ron, of course, contributes to that gender balance the other way around, albeit by video. My thanks also to the City UK for including a panel on the urgent need to embrace the digital revolution. And I really thank you all for your questions. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. Thank you all very much.